So when Jesus formally began his ministry, he set himself up as someone who liberates. In fact, when he was doing his sort of coming out sermon, his grand mission statement that he was preaching in his hometown of Nazareth, he named it that way. He said that he came to set people free, to give people who couldn't see sight again, to give people freedom from the burdens of their lives. He came, in a sense, to trade them a type of life, to take a type of life that was heavy laden, that was burdened, and to give them a type of life that put them at ease, that put them at rest, to give them a type of life that allowed them to live as free people. And this is a really big deal for the folks of his day. I think it's a big deal for us too, but specifically for them. Because in the first century in Judaism, the religious scene of the day was one that really burdened people with rules and regulations. They had this sort of grand system of sacrifices that had to be made. There were lots of very specific sacrifices that you would make for a large number of sins. It would range in size from very small animals to great big old heifers. I mean, just depending on how big of a sinner you were, there were direct consequences to your sin. And so in a sense, I think the people of first century Judaism were burdened. They were belabored by that. I think they almost lived, in a sense, afraid of God. They had to do a lot of work to keep God at bay, if it makes sense to say it that way. But Jesus came with a different way, a different type of language. He attempted to set people free from the pressure and the burden of those rules and regulations. And one of the ways that he did that was by insisting that it's not what you do, it's more who you are. He would say to folks, it's not about making sure that you have all the right sacrifices in place. It's just about making sure that you have love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. Now, we might not be sacrificing animals in the same way, but I think we have a simpler problem. We live in a culture that tells us that more is better. The more I do, the better I am. The more chores I do at home, the better of a spouse I am. Though taking out the garbage is not the same as taking out the baggage. The more Bible studies I take, the better Christian I am. Though more studying does not necessarily mean better following. The more extracurricular activities I do, the better student I am. But extracurricular does not necessarily translate itself to extra character. The more I do, the better I am. That's the myth that we're sold. And this myth clutters our lives and it clutters our calendars. But I think Jesus wants to liberate us from that in the same way that he wanted to liberate his contemporaries. You see, Jesus came as a very particular type of person. He came as what they call a rabbi. A rabbi is a teacher. Now, we don't have rabbis in the same sense these days. A rabbi is not a teacher like we think of a teacher. The job of a rabbi is to have disciples. And these disciples follow around the rabbi, not just to learn what he knows, not just to do what he does, but literally to become like the rabbi. That's what Jesus said. It's not so much about what you do, it's about who you are. And so this is basically the way it would work. You'd have a kid, top of the class, cream of the crop. This kid would make it until he sort of ran out of schooling options. And then he would come to the rabbi and he'd say, I would like to take on your yoke. I would like to take on your teaching. It's a farming term, a yoke. You would yoke two animals together, a mature ox, let's say, and an immature ox, until the immature one learned how to be a good beast of burden. So give me your yoke, Rabbi. If that rabbi thought that this student could become like him, he would say, come and follow me. And so that's what Jesus did. He was a rabbi, and he invited people to come and follow him. Now, a lot of times when we boil down Christianity, we boil it down to a philosophy, a set of things that we have to do in order to get ourselves into heaven. Or sometimes we boil it down to a belief system. What's a list of things we have to do to believe in order to believe ourselves into heaven? That's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is not a more is better type of guy. It's not about how much you're doing or what you're doing. It's about who you are deep down on the inside. And like I said before, I believe that we need to hear that just as much as they did. Because in the same way that it led to busyness for them in a religious sense, I think it leads us to jam-pack our calendars full of stuff. Good stuff, but lots of good stuff. What busyness does for us is it makes our life this sort of tenuous balancing act. It clutters our lives by letting many good things get in the way of the really great things that we're called to be and to do. God's invitation to come and follow, God's call to discipleship, is an invitation to a life of balance. Balanced by his kingdom priorities, which ultimately lead us, I believe, to peace and to rest. So, what did Jesus do? How did he go about making this happen, making this a reality for his followers? Well, the first thing he did was he got their attention. And once he had their attention, he focused them on the margins of life. For them, this meant the marginalized, the people around that nobody wanted to pay attention to. I still think that's part of our calling. But now that perhaps I have your attention, I'd like to focus you on the margins of life in a different sense. I want you to think about it this way. Back in the day, farmers would plant their fields and grow their crops, and then when they harvested them, they would leave the edges unharvested, so that passersby who were hungry, didn't have a place to stay, could pick some corn or some wheat and have food to eat. The process is called gleaning. In fact, it was a requirement under Jewish law. Maybe it should be a requirement of our lives. Think about the edges of your life. What if we left the edges of our life open for those who were passing by in our lives and needed a little bit of our attention? There's actually a guy named Richard Swenson wrote a book called Margin, and this is how he defines margin. He says, margin is the space between our load and our limits. It's the amount allowed beyond that which is needed. It is something held in reserve for contingencies in unanticipated situations. This is the part that really resonated with me. Margin is the gap between rest and exhaustion. The space between breathing freely and suffocating. How many of you have been there? It's my experience that when life becomes so jam-packed, we run out of margin, we actually miss opportunities both to be in ministry to other people and to have ministry done towards us, to be shaped and formed who we are. I mean, when my life is full, like when my calendar is stacked, I resist anything that looks like an interruption. But what I found is, it is in those interruptions that my greatest ministry takes place. It's at the moments where some random friend stops by through town, or I get a phone call on my busiest day of the week. Those are the times when I feel like I have been the most shaped. They're also the times when I've had an opportunity to pour my life out to others. But when we're busy, when we don't have that margin, we miss those opportunities. Those real chances to love well and to live differently. Those things, they don't occur on a schedule, or at least they don't occur on my schedule. I want to tell you a story real quick. I call this the tale of two Michaels. There's a kid that came to visit our church for the first time, and I want to try to make a good impression. I emailed him, he had lots of questions. I said, let's go hang out, we'll go to lunch. He said, great. Well, at the same time, I got a message from the main office that there was a guy who stopped by off the streets and needed some help. His name was also Michael. And I talked to that Michael, the homeless one, and I said, listen, but I don't really have time. I got this really important meeting. He was like, that's okay, I can go with you. It's not a problem. Fantastic. Thank you for that. I appreciate your generosity, Michael. So I called the other Michael, and I was like, listen, dude, I'm really sorry. I've got to run this homeless guy out of Raleigh, the VA. He's like, that's okay. I'll ride with. Fantastic. The Michaels want to hang out. This is great. This is just how I planned my afternoon to work out. So I put both Michaels in the car, and off we go. Now, one Michael I'm trying to impress. The other Michael's got me teed off pretty bad because he's interrupted my day. We stop at the VA. Homeless Michael gets out and goes inside, and it's just me and like normal Michael in the back seat. And he said something to me, changed my ministry. I probably didn't even know it. You'll hear it later. He said, you seem like you're not being very patient with Michael, and I'm pretty sure he can tell. It's in the back seat. I was like, you tell me how to do my job, I'll tell you how to do it. You're right. I am being impatient with this guy. I don't know if you can tell or not, but I am being impatient. So then, without saying anything, because you don't want to lose your cool as a pastor, right? I made the rest of our time together as we sat at Melon Mushroom eating pizza together, me, Michael, and Michael. Hey, homeless Michael, I'm so patient with you, like all day. Like I'm just trying to prove my point to the other Michael that I could, in fact, be patient. But this is what happens. Ministry is not scheduled. Opportunities like that, you just don't put them on your calendar. If you have no margin of life, you miss those opportunities. If we're going to claim the responsibilities of loving well and living differently, if we're going to be the people that Jesus is calling us to be, then we're going to be those people when we least expect it. I recently read an article about budgeting your time, and the guy suggested you come up with like an ideal budget, and then you sort of reflect on it week in and week out. How close were you to hitting your ideal budget of time? That's not really interesting. I mean, Chalice and I just budgeted for our year, whatever that's going to look like. And, I mean, we started with how much money we're going to make. That's a fairly fixed cost. And then we took out all the things we know we have to spend. And then you're sort of left with this stuff you can play around with in the middle. I wonder if you looked at your time in that way, what that budget would reveal about your values. What that budget would say about who you are. There's actually, I haven't downloaded it because it'd be embarrassing how much time I waste, but there's actually an app that you can use to track your time. And it shows up like a budget on a little pie chart. I wonder what that would say. Chalice and we had a date with friends on Friday, which we didn't go on. And so we were trying to find another date to meet with them. And I have one night in February that I can hang out with these people. I know February is a short month, but it is not that short. I mean, I should have more than one night, don't you think? Now, here's the funny thing is, let's assume it was a different sermon topic. If I told you that, you'd be like, I know Owen Barrow. He's a good pastor. He works hard. You wouldn't even care what I was doing. I mean, I could be flying a kite for all you care. I'm just busy. And busyness means I'm good. That's the myth we buy into, right? The more you do, the better you are. How do we end up like that? Day after day, just stack things. Stack things on top of one another until there is no margin in our life. No breathing room whatsoever. Day after day, time after time. We got meetings. We got projects. We got soccer games and baseball practices for both kids. We take a Bible study. We don't have any time to study, of course, because we're busy packing lunches during our morning devotion. We're in that club and this club. We got date night, which was awesome until we just decided to do home repairs because we didn't have any other time during the week. And then we got more meetings. We got more events. More, and more. I mean, why do we do this to ourselves? This is what we look like. This is how we operate in our weeks. If you want to have a civilized conversation with me, I'm going to run out of oxygen. Like, I don't have any time to talk to you. This is how we look, though, every day. This is the message that we send as Christians. This is what Jesus likes. Do this. It's so much fun. Why do we stack things on top of each other so high? Why do we run so hard and go absolutely nowhere? What are we running for or from? Is this changing our lives for the better? Is this giving us more character? Is this making us more loving, more joyful, more peaceful, or patient, or kind? Is this helping us love others better? Or is it's just making us tired? This is what Jesus says. Come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle, I am humble in heart, and you will find rest for for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Which would you prefer? That or this? Because this is the type of life that Jesus is inviting us to come and to take hold of. Come, take my yoke, be my disciple, love well and live differently. It will bring you peace and rest. It will bring you life. Let's pray together.